Predictability is a cornerstone of foreign policy. Once in a while, you get a nice surprise, but more often than not, it's the same. Case in point, the India-China meeting on Thursday. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh met his Chinese counterpart, General Li Shangfu. It was on the sidelines of the SCO Defence Ministers meeting. Symbolically, it was a big deal. The Defence Ministers haven't held talks since the 2020 Galwan clashes. So the pictures made for headlines. But the outcome, not so much. India stuck to the same principles as before. Resolve the border first, then we can normalize. Let me quote the Indian Defence Ministry. This is what they said. Development of relations between India and China is premised on prevalence of peace and tranquility at the border. Violation of existing agreements has eroded the entire basis of bilateral relations, and disengagement at the border will logically be followed with de-escalation. Now, that's a strong message from India. More than strong, it's a clear message. You cannot de-link the border from bilateral relations. Let me explain why. Picture you and your neighbor. One fine day, they extend their compound wall into your property. You stop talking to that neighbor, but they don't seem to care. They want you to forget the encroachment and invite them to your party. Would you agree? I think I know the answer. The fact is, boundaries are key to every relationship, personal, political, or bilateral. India says, respect that boundary, then we can talk. What about the Chinese? Well, their statement came much later. The next day, in fact. Let me quote the important bits. The two sides should take a long-term view, place the border issue in an appropriate position in bilateral relations, and promote the transition of the border situation to normalized management. So China is of the opposite opinion. They say, let's not focus just on the border. Let's look at the border as part of the larger scheme of things. In other words, put it on the back burner. Or as Beijing calls it, normalized management. What does that mean? The same words were used by China's former Foreign Minister Wang Yi. It basically means, let's stick to the status quo. How easy for them to say. The normal situation would be pre-2020, before the Galwan clashes. The current situation benefits China and not India, which is why New Delhi is emphasizing on resolving the border first. If not, why have international charters and bilateral agreements at all? Every country can keep salami slicing their neighbor. The question is, why are the Chinese so eager to normalize relations now? I say eager because Beijing's statement reeks of it. Let me quote again. China and India share far more common interests than differences. The two sides should jointly contribute wisdom and strength to world and regional peace and stability. How convenient. You encroach your neighbor's border, but you want to create world peace with that same neighbor. What explains this Chinese strategy? Two things. Number one, China sees India as a big market. Despite all the tensions, bilateral trade has boomed. In 2022, it was worth $135 billion. That trade is heavily stacked in China's favor. Their exports to India were worth $118 billion. Their imports from India, just $17 billion. On average, bilateral trade is growing by 12% every year. Like I said, this is despite all the tensions. The second reason is multilateral engagement. China's ultimate goal is to reshape the global order. First, displace the US, then become the leading global power. But to do that, China needs allies. It needs multilateral organizations to challenge American dominance. And they are BRICS and SCO, to name a few. And what's common in both? India. So without New Delhi's support, a new order is not possible. Hence China's eagerness to normalize ties with India. India must realize and leverage this. It's not enough to just say that we are delinking the border and bilateral relations. It must also reflect on the ground. Unfortunately, a $100 billion trade deficit reflects the opposite. My point is, it cannot be business as usual with China. It's something India has already done with Pakistan. New Delhi has made it clear that terror and talks cannot go hand in hand. Similarly, border incursions and trade should not go hand in hand. Our last story tonight is about a statue. A statue of the Buddha has been found in Egypt. It dates back to the age of the Roman Empire. Egypt has also unearthed a Sanskrit inscription and coins belonging to an Indian kingdom. So how did these artifacts land in Egypt? Well, it's more proof of what we've long known. India's global footprint is a centuries-old story. India has been interacting with the world for millennia. It spans trade, cultural exchanges, and even the spread of Indic religions. India has left a mark across the world, which is why symbols of ancient civilization keep emerging around the world. This time, it happens to be Egypt. Our next report tells you more.
India and Egypt are both among the oldest civilizations of the world, and they have a history of close contact from ancient times. So it's no surprise that this statue of the Buddha has been found in Egypt. The statue was found in the ancient Egyptian town of Berenike. According to a statement by Egypt's Antiquities Ministry, a Polish-US mission discovered the statue. The mission was digging at an ancient temple in the seaport town. It said the discovery has important indications over the presence of trade ties between Egypt and India during the Roman era. The statue measures 28 inches in height, and part of its right side, including the leg, are missing. The Buddha is portrayed with a halo around his head, and also a lotus flower by his side. It's not known how exactly the statue landed in Egypt, but if we were taking a guess, the statue got there during the reign of Emperor Ashoka. Ashoka's edicts refer to his relations with Egypt, particularly when Egypt was under the rule of Ptolemy II some 2,300 years ago. It's not just the Buddha's statue that's been found. Archaeologists also stumbled across a Sanskrit inscription, believed to be about 2,000 years old. Apart from the statue and inscription, 2 2nd-century coins from the Satavahana Kingdom of India were also found. The port of Berenike was among the main trading hubs of Egypt. It handled ships carrying a variety of products from India. Products like pepper, spices, precious stones, textiles, and even ivory. These goods would be transported on camelbacks across the desert to the Nile River. From there, they eventually found their way to the rest of the Roman Empire. The city of Berenike was itself one of the transit hubs which connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Indian Ocean. Needless to say, trade between India and Egypt was booming, and remnants of ancient ties between both the civilizations are now being unearthed. In 2021, Egyptian torpedo jars were unearthed in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. Archaeologists believe that the jars were used to transport oil from Egypt to India. And while some Indian artifacts landed in different parts of the world due to trade, others were snatched by force as a result of foreign conquests. According to India's Ministry of Culture, over 200 stolen artifacts have been retrieved since 2014. Most of these came from the UK, Canada, Australia, the US, and France. Again, there's a reason why so much was stolen from India. Up to the 17th century, India was one of the world's largest economies. That made it a target for innumerable invasions and colonial conquests. The discovery of Indian artifacts in Egypt is not a fluke. Egypt has been on a mission lately to revive its tourism industry. And in that endeavor, it has unveiled many archaeological discoveries in recent years. Critics say the Egyptian government is conducting a flurry of excavations. The goal is to find items that grab the media's attention. Egypt plans to attract over 30 million tourists annually by 2028. This would be a significant jump. Before the pandemic, Egypt attracted just 13 million people. Be that as it may, Egypt's quest to unearth artifacts has now shown the kind of relationship it shared with India thousands of years ago.
Now let's talk about Pakistan's iron brother China. It's whipping a storm in a teacup. The Chinese are riled up. They're angry with the United States over a panda. That's right, the latest US-China diplomatic row is about a panda. It's called Yaya. In the year 2003, Beijing gave this panda to a zoo in Memphis. Yaya was a goodwill ambassador. She was meant to promote China-US ties. But today she has come to signify the deep mistrust between the two countries. Recently, there was a major outcry on Chinese social media, and it got so bad that Yaya had to be dispatched back to China. So why is Beijing being so sensitive about a panda? Let me give you some context. Pandas are central to Chinese diplomacy. Beijing uses them as a tool. It sends pandas to countries around the world. They are sent as gifts, as signs of Chinese friendship. So if China gives you a panda, it means they see you as a special friend. This is China's panda diplomacy. In the early 2000s, China's relationship with the US was rock solid. China had joined the World Trade Organization. America had supported China's membership. The two countries were working together on a host of issues, from the economy to counterterrorism. They were on the same page on everything, it seemed. It was said that the US administration was full of quote-unquote panda huggers. It was the high point of their relationship. So China showed its love. It sent 2 pandas to the US on a 20-year loan, Yaya and her male companion, Lele. They ended up in a zoo in Memphis, and they were welcomed with a lot of fanfare. They became the centerpiece of a China exhibit there. That was 2 decades ago. Remember, the loan was for 20 years. The agreement was about to expire. But a few months back, tragedy struck. Lele, the male companion of Yaya, died. He died due to a heart disease. And even before his death, stories began circulating on the Chinese internet. Mostly rumors and false claims. They said the Memphis Zoo was mistreating the Chinese pandas, that they were being given substandard bamboo. They said the pandas were malnourished. Then photos began circulating. Some users said Yaya's fur was looking thin and patchy. They complained about mistreatment of the panda at the hands of the Americans. Let me repeat, these were rumors, but they spread like fire, so much so that the fate of Yaya became a national issue in China. To add fuel to the fire, the pandas in America were being compared to those in Russia. Of course, China has gifted pandas to Russia, and Chinese netizens pulled out their photos. They said the Russian pandas looked well, which means Moscow is taking better care of the Chinese animals. Again, none of this had any factual basis, but the narrative caught on. The pandas in America were called oppressed. Soon online petitions were launched. They demanded the return of Yaya. Look at some of these posters. They went viral, and this is what they said. Mom, I've been working for 20 years. Do I have enough to buy a return ticket home? Here's another one. Protect Yaya, shout it together. The sentiment caught on, and the result is this. Yaya is back in China. Earlier this week, she landed in Shanghai. It was a 16-hour flight. Yaya was brought back on a special Panda Express plane. She's now being kept in quarantine inside a zoo. It is equipped with an air conditioner and an area for outdoor activities. The Chinese government has also issued a statement. It says Yaya was being looked after well in America.
The Memphis Zoo has a relatively sound management system and operation procedures. Yaya was under good care throughout her stay in the Memphis Zoo. She is deeply loved by the American people. The cooperative research on giant panda has facilitated the protection of the animal, public education, and people-to-people exchanges. China is willing to continue working with other partners, the US side included, to make contribution to the conservation of endangered species.
So all those rumors about mistreatment were at the end of the day just rumors. And the Chinese censors that are famous for scrubbing the internet and controlling the narrative let these rumors spread. The question is, did they start them? Well, there's no way to tell, but Yaya has returned, and the row over this panda marks the end of China's panda diplomacy with the US. Now, if you're among those dealing with pressure to marry, either from family or friends, this story is for you. Because being single is okay, and you have the Church of England to plead your case. And if you think that's bizarre, wait till you hear their reasoning. The Church of England says single people should be valued. Why? Because Jesus was single. Good Lord, we say. Let me explain what they're trying to do here. To make their case, they have published a 238-page long report titled Love Matters. It is a labor of love, pardon the pun, of 2 years of examining relationships and families. Confession time, I haven't read it. But what it says is basically this, that single people shouldn't be treated as quote-unquote lesser than those in relationships. Not just that, the Church of England, in fact, wants to celebrate singleness. And I'm not making this up, because God's own son chose to be a bachelor. So the next time you're accosted at a wedding or engagement of your younger cousin by pesky relatives, you have the perfect repost. You can't be wrong in your life choices if you have Jesus for company. Facetiousness aside, why has the Church of England suddenly gone woke? Why is procreation no longer paramount? Why is marriage not the be-all and end-all of every existence? Are they being truly progressive by accepting diversity in personal relations? Not trying to play the devil's advocate, but we don't think so. Why? Because this is the same church that has been eviscerated for being too rigid, tone-deaf, and out of sync with modern reality. As recently as 2019, the church frowned upon sex outside marriage. It said, and I'm quoting, "It falls short of God's purposes for human beings." Now, the recently released report by that same church says, singleness does not necessarily imply celibacy. That's a mighty change of heart for an antiquated institution. But this sudden advocacy of singlehood might be more pragmatic than progressive. Because unlike the biblical Noah's Ark, people want to stay out rather than in the church. So like aging celebrities, the church too is attempting an image makeover to steady the ship, as it were. We've talked about the crisis of faith in England, how the number of faithfuls has been dwindling. The confidence in the church is extremely brittle, especially among the young, and the church knows this. It has to rebrand itself to stay relevant. Ironically, the first casualty of this happened to be God himself. And to refer to him as he might no longer be acceptable, because the Church of England is considering the use of gender-neutral terms for God. Many have slammed the decision. They say it's taking things too far. They're accusing the church of losing its way in the quagmire of political correctness. So we ask, is the church overcompensating to fix its reputational damage? Almost like it has boxes to tick to maintain its aura of credibility. Admittedly, the church report does reflect the reality of present-day Britain. The number of single people has shot up, more than 8% jump from 2011 to 2021. And the report talks not just about single people, but also those from the LGBTQ community and their alienation from the church. Earlier this year, it agreed to bless same-sex couples who had civil marriages, but it still refuses to allow same-sex marriages to be held in the church. That's the hill, or should we say the cross, that they have chosen to die on. So while the church seems determined to shed its cloak of conservatism, the question is, will it mitigate the crisis of faith in Britain? Well, only God knows. But what we can say for certain is this: the war cry of singles this season is Miley Cyrus's breakup song, Flowers. Even Beyoncé celebrated the single life with a hit song, Single Ladies. And now the Church of England agrees, being single has never looked this good. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with the Pope. Pope Francis is in Hungary for a 3-day visit. This is his first trip since he was admitted to hospital in March. Spain, meanwhile, has put an end to the tradition of dwarf bullfighting, a move that has been lauded by disability groups. In Kenya, citizens are planting their age in trees, an active effort to combat deforestation in the country. And finally, what makes April the 28th significant? We're taking you back in history. On this day in 1945, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was executed. He was shot dead by Italian partisans. This happened while he and his mistress were trying to flee to Switzerland. Mussolini was then hung upside down in Milan's public square. A gruesome death for the dictator who once founded fascism. We leave you on that note. Thanks for watching.
Grazie, che lei...
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defence minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.